This episode of the All About Nothing podcast is sponsored by listeners like you and Big Media LLC, encouraging you to check your voter registration. In a world where every voice counts, ensuring your registration is accurate and up to date is the simplest, most effective way to guarantee your vote is heard. Don't leave your participation to chance. Take a moment today and verify your status and stay ready for the next election by visiting theallaboutnothing.com/voter.
The All About Nothing podcast may have language and content
that isn't appropriate for some.
Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome, Nothingers, to the All About Nothing podcast. This is episode number 315. I am Barrett Gruber. Please subscribe and share the show. It's how we get new listeners. Also, please consider supporting the show financially by visiting theallaboutnothing.com, becoming an official member, and proudly calling yourself a true Nothinger. We'll have more details of that at the end of the show. If you can't do that, give us a 5-star review, a like, and follow us across social media. You can find links at theallaboutnothing.com. Real quick, we also want to thank Joe Madge, South Carolina House District 89 candidate for the Democratic Party, as my guest last week. Had a really good time talking to him. Also met up with him at his Joe with Joe this past Saturday, where they all went out canvassing after I drank most of their coffee. And so Joe and his wife, Julia, I really appreciate them inviting me to that. Had a good time. All right. So we're going to get into this episode. First, I'll just say government works best in the dark. Backroom zoning deals, secret tax breaks, NDAs that keep public employees quiet about their ongoing government work, what they're doing, and the local reporters who used to catch all of it are mostly gone. My guest today spent 2 decades at the Washington Post chasing exactly that kind of story, including a series exposing special privileges for a wealthy landowner that was dodging water and sewer rules, and an investigation for Reveal that uncovered a massive backlog in the immigration system. That work became her book, Backroom Deals in Our Backyards. Winner of the Studs and Ida Turkle Award, these days she's tracking the next wave of secrecy, data centers, which I know no one here wants, but we still use AI. I don't get it. Behind closed doors, and what she calls Secrecy Industrial Complex. Please welcome investigative journalist Miranda Spivack. Spivack, correct?
That's right. Yep,
I have heard your name pronounced differently several times, and I finally just decided Michael Steele knows how to say it, so I'm going to say it the same way he says it.
Yeah, you're right. He and I go way back. He was the, number 2 deputy governor, whatever we called it, in Maryland. So,
yeah,
as a Republican, whatever. Anyway, thanks very much for having me, for pronouncing my name correctly. It is Spivack. It is a tough one. It often gets misspelled, whatever. Anyway, you can find me on the internet in a lot of different ways, but it helps to spell my name correctly. Oh, there you go.
There are absolutely a wealth of you being interviewed, as well as 20 years of Washington Post work that you did. So it's absolutely a pleasure to have you on. I was very excited when we were approached about having you on, because I had read a number of your, I guess, columns and pieces from the Washington Post, and then what was it, about 2015 that your departure was kind of a shock to me.
Yeah.
But what was it like working for the Washington Post when it was good?
Well, and it was actually 2013 when I left, so it's been a while. A while. So when I was at the Post, which was from 1990, actually I worked for a Post subsidiary for a couple of years, so 94 to 2013, almost 20 years. And at the time, it was still family owned by the Graham Company, Graham family, and Don Graham was very active in stewarding the paper and being sure that it was independent and aggressive, much like his mother had done during Watergate. So it was, a great place to work in a lot of ways. And also very, very devoted to the region that we were in, the Washington region, to local news, which has, the DC area has about 5 million people in it, if you draw a circle around the city and go out to all the different suburbs. And, as you know, that's bigger than many states.
Yeah.
The state of Maine has about 1 million people, a little more than that now. Wyoming, I think, is under 1 million. And so really covering these localities where billions of dollars are being spent in public money on schools, on roads, on all kinds of on healthcare, whatever. And we did a lot of coverage of that. And as you can imagine, when there's a lot of money floating around, there is scandal.
Yeah.
And the Post was very aggressive on local news. Well, then the Graham family decided, for whatever reason, and they said it was economic, that they really couldn't make a go of it. They sold the paper to Jeff Bezos, which is around the time when I left. He was supposedly committed to the region, but I think that evaporated very quickly. And his editor, who had actually been hired before Bezos bought the paper, Marty Barron, who also had been heralded as a great partisan of local news, pretty much Bezos said, we're not doing that anymore. And it started, I mean, it wasn't that obvious, but it became obvious over time. And, Barron, I know people have a lot of admiration for him, and I certainly respect his journalism, but he did not stand up for this in the way that Len Downey, his predecessor, who was working for the Graham family, I think would have spoken up and stood up for local news and explained to Bezos why this mattered. Anyway, it all devolved from there. And, as you know, now the Post is in really kind of dire straits, and there were massive layoffs this year. And there are basically 10 people, I think, covering the region of 5 million people. When I was there were probably 200. So It's big difference. And I would call it journalism malpractice. I mean, if we don't cover local issues, our democracy is going south really fast.
Agreed. Absolutely. One of the stories about you showing up at a planning board meeting for literally one thing and walking out with a completely different investigation into wealthy landowners.
Yeah.
Tell us about this landowner dodging the rules and
this was interesting. This is a guy named Mitch Rales, and you could Google him and his brother. They own a company called Danaher, and it's a multi-faceted, billions of dollars, many kinds of different things, among them tools and building construction materials, but all kinds of stuff. And so Mitch Rales lives in Potomac, Maryland, and had already built, unbeknownst to me, and I've lived there in that area for 30 years, he had this massive, almost personal art gallery with pretty fantastic art in it, and it was barely open to the public. And you got a big tax deduction actually for it. And he had, impressionists, he had abstract expressionists. I mean, just stuff that you would see at the Met or the National Gallery or the Louvre or whatever. Anyway, private collection. Okay, so because he had acquired lots and lots of phenomenal art, and a lot of it was in storage, he wanted to build another big building. And the other big building he wanted to build was about as big as the East Wing of the National Gallery in Washington. I can't give you the dimensions now. It's been a while, but it was big. All right, so here's the problem. He's outside the public water and sewer zone in Montgomery County, Maryland. And that zone had been set up decades ago to preserve open space, farmland, whatever. And, if you start to bring public water and sewer into parts that are undeveloped, you will bring development with it. And so this was clearly sort of an environmental decision that the county had made years ago. Anyway, but he needed a sewer. He couldn't build this other building without having a real sewer system. Well and septic wasn't going to cut it for him. And so he started to very quietly learn the ropes of politics in Maryland. And and I was at this planning board meeting about some other investigation I'd done about Clarksburg, Maryland, which was a development that went awry. And I was trying to pick up some latest decisions on that. And I started listening to this lawyer who I knew of, a big development lawyer, talk about this museum in Potomac, Maryland with all this fantastic art. And I'm like, I have lived here for decades. I've been to every museum in this region. I have never heard of this. And that led me to unravel or expose the whole story. I will say this, fast forward, he got what he wanted. And, but what was really interesting to me about it is that Mitch Rales had never given an interview to a reporter since I don't know, for about 20 years, because he and his brother had been accused of being corporate raiders in short pants in Forbes magazine, and that ticked them off so much. They said, we're done with the media. Obviously, they were ahead of their time, since lots of people don't talk to the media now and get away with it. And so, I approached him. I did not really know this, and I approached him, and I wanted to write a story about his museum and his goals for a new museum and the whole sewer controversy, which the neighbors didn't like because they couldn't get sewers. They had well and septic. And interestingly enough, he gave me the interview because he began to realize that he had to have a public posture on this, and proudly told me how he'd been lobbying the governor and all, didn't sort of understand that people were going to be a little put off by this. Did this fancy reception for the school superintendent. I mean, so I had people who were telling me, what did they eat, whatever. I mean, you can read the story. It's still up. There are several stories about this. But what also was, to me, very amusing, just as a journalist, was that the business reporters at the Washington Post have been trying for years to get an interview with this guy. And they couldn't get it. And I said, well, that's okay, because I write about sewers. And, that's why he wanted to talk to me. But, it was interesting. It was really a story about how, you're wealthy, you can get what you want. And that's sort of been a theme in many ways of my work over time, which is, the rules don't really apply to you.
Yeah, it's and I think the same sort of goes, like you've been discussing these data centers and how a lot of these communities have been, these data centers are popping up in communities where basically people don't even know what it is that's being built until it's finally there. And then they've got 7 or 8 like exhaust stacks where they're running natural gas to power this thing. Right.
And diesel every month when they have to do their backups and show that, the thing won't go down. So,
How is it that they're getting away with these?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon. I think, as you mentioned, everybody has a smartphone, right?
Yeah.
And we want all the things that, data centers in many ways are powering. And so it's a real dilemma. But I think the way the industry has gone about it, and this is, of course, Amazon, Microsoft, and every other big internet company, Facebook, is that they've done it very quietly. I think they were always wise to the fact that these things were going to be viewed as public nuisances. They're noisy. They use a lot of water, although there are some efforts to try to resolve that. They are putting a lot of pressure on the electric grid. And in Virginia, which is sort of the epicenter of the data center boom, if you will, although it's now spreading around the country, the local officials sign non-disclosure agreements, and that's also happening around the country. And I think the industry understands that people don't, if they find out about this and they see these things and they're noisy and they're in my neighborhood somehow, they're not going to like it. And they are organizing all around the country to try to at least locate them in places that aren't highly populated. But, the pressure that they're putting on the electrical grid, which in Virginia, the ratepayers have been paying for, it's, you and me subsidizing these things, not good. So, but the problem, I think, also is that local officials, they're torn. They think these data centers may create jobs, and they do at the outset, especially for electricians and construction. The long-lasting job creation is not great, but if you're a local official and somebody comes to you and says, I got a project that's going to create a bunch of jobs, you're in a tough spot in terms of, trying to turn it away.
Yeah.
But then being forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement where you can't even tell your constituents what's going on. And in some cases, you can't even tell them you signed a non-disclosure agreement is pretty egregious, I think. And that's something where I think communities are getting wise to this issue and really standing up. So
Yeah. One of the things I think that before, I guess, the cusp of AI, we used to we called them data farms. Like
Yeah.
and they weren't huge. The companies that I've worked for in my past, we have had data farms where it was basically just a storage center where data was held. But that's not everything that goes on with these data centers, is because of the amount of processing they have going on to be as the fastest possible system for whichever corporations are using them for things. Because you're right, it's the power consumption. It is the amount of water that it takes to actually keep these centers cool, and what they're eating through, and the resources that they're eating through in those areas. And I know that for the most part, they're putting. I say for the most part, they are trying to put them in sparse areas that potentially would have been agriculture at one point, and now are the land's being utilized for something, but it's really the resource eating that it's doing.
Yeah.
A data center isn't going to employ, after it's built and up and running, an 18-acre data center is going to have 26 people potentially that are running around on golf carts to take care of maintenance issues and things like that. For the most part, they're all operated from overseas or other parts of the country and things like that. It's disheartening to know that our politicians and the people that are in the position of allowing these things also live in our communities.
Right.
And don't, I guess they just, is it a moral compass thing, or is it just but they just don't seem to be concerned.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting when you say is it a moral compass thing. I think in some ways it is, but I think that you can never underestimate sort of lack of knowledge and incompetence to some degree, and a failure to recognize, they get snowed by the big corporate whatever who shows up and makes all these claims. And if you look at something like Amazon, not my favorite company, search for its second headquarters, and it went all around the country, and it did demand non-disclosure agreements from localities, and they all signed it because they were afraid. Well, if they didn't sign it, they wouldn't even have been in the running. But they also were afraid that, if they didn't go along and at least make a pitch to Amazon, that it would come back to bite them politically. And so I think that was wrong-headed. I think if every city had been open about what they were trying to give away to Amazon, it would have changed the competitive field, and everybody would have been able to evaluate, okay, my city wants to give this big tax break to Amazon, and they say they're going to create X jobs, which, by the way, they have backed off on in Arlington, Virginia, where they ultimately ended up. But I get the fear that politicians have. You don't want to be seen as somebody who's squelching jobs, but you also have pressure on the environment, on water use, whatever. And I think they have trouble balancing it out. And so, it may be a lack of a moral compass. I think it's also lack of information and really good analysis.
Yeah. Your book is built around accidental activists, people who never really set out to fight City Hall but got dragged into it. Is there a common thread in how that really happens to someone?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to me. And I looked at this or I tried to find these people around the country and in sort of diverse communities and, all kinds of diverse issues, because I was very interested in how and why somebody does end up being an activist in their community. And in some cases in my book, not all of them, they really did make positive change. And I think the common thread is they find out that there's something wrong in their community. It was poisoned drinking water. It was a failing sewer system in a community in Alabama. It's toxins in firefighter turnout gear, problems with the algorithms used in the criminal justice system, and dangerous roads. And they think, okay, I've discovered this problem in my community. I'm going to go to the local officials and they are going to welcome my finding and they are going to help me solve it, or I am going to help them solve it, but they're going to carry the ball, not me. And what happens in almost all of these cases is that for a variety of reasons, the local officials, in one case, in the poisoned drinking water in Hoosick Falls, New York, the mayor said to Michael Hickey, the fellow who figured this out, don't tell anybody. We have this project going on. We're trying to put Hoosick Falls on the map. Of course, if you didn't tell anybody, which Michael did, but if you didn't tell anybody and then people move into the community and find out that the water system is wrecked, that's not good either. But the mayor didn't see it that way. He was very nervous. And so, what happens is people get that kind of response. And then they're like, what? Wait? Really? Wait a minute. I thought you were from the government and you were here to help me. That old cliche. Well, and it turns out not to be true. They all get pushed off for some reason. And that really makes them angry. And I think the anger helps to fuel their very tenacious and in some cases years-long efforts to undo the harm and to expose the problem.
Yeah.
I think it's a personality type that some of them didn't even know they had, I think, until they sort of got rebuffed.
Look, I am constantly in fear of the personality types that people aren't aware of themselves. The self-awareness that's constantly an issue.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of admiration for these people. They are totally self-taught. They were not community activists. I mean, there are some people around the country who I would say are sort of professional community activists, even if they're volunteers. These people are not that. They learned that they could get public records. They learned how to organize. They learned how to lobby, but really taught themselves. And one of the messages I think of the book is look at their experiences with what I would call kitchen table issues. This is going on in your community too. And here's how they did it. So maybe we can short circuit the process for other activists. I mean, in some ways, the book is sort of a playbook. And in fact, the last chapter is a playbook for how you do this. But the individual stories are, to me, I had a lot of admiration for these people. I was amazed at what they were able to accomplish. And I think they have shown the way on a lot of different issues, which ultimately I think are issues that help, that if you can resolve locally, do help sustain and strengthen our democracy.
Yeah. And also just having a desire to see your own locale or your own community just progress or potentially stay static, or if that's what you want. My own activism in the sense of our county, we have a plot of land near here that is within only 2 or 3 miles of where I live, but it's between me and the interstate. And that plot of land has come up for rezoning several times for, instead of single home development, multi-home, which is basically an apartment or an apartment complex. And I have a desire to see my property remain as high a value as I could potentially sell it one day. And I've had this desire to not see an apartment. And fortunately, there have been other people that as well. But it's as easy sometimes as just showing up to the council, looking at the agenda, what's going to be on the county council's meeting,
right? And
then attending the meeting. And when it's open to the public for discussion, then standing up and just expressing yourself, especially, keeping an eye on the person that is your voted official for that county council. And so it's really, it comes down, a lot of it comes down to just making sure that you're participating in the system.
Right.
I think that's one thing that, whether it's voting or being a part of the conversation is always just something that's extremely important. I've seen where my mother lives in Atlanta or just outside Atlanta, they have had a number of industrial parks pop up. And it's one of those things, like she sees them and she said, she and my brother will tell me about them or what's going in over here, or there used to be a forest here and things like that. And I just tell them, I said, you have the opportunity to know these things are going on ahead of time. You just have to participate.
Right.
So, why do you think there's so much more attention being paid to things like federal scandals, but barely when this stuff happens at state or local
I mean,
level?
I think that this goes back to the decline of local news. And, there are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which was Craigslist, frankly, which, sucked up all the classified ads, which are what sustains local and, what's news organizations. And so that's definitely a problem that the watchdog who used to be your proxy at the city council meeting isn't there anymore in many communities. And so you're absolutely right. People need to show up. And I think also I would just add to what you said, which is that not only do you need to show up, you need to show up before you need something.
Yeah.
And so you're right. You need to watch the agendas but, get to know the city clerk, get to know the clerk at the courthouse. These are people who have their finger on the pulse. They also know where all the documents are. And you should get to know them and ask, find out how they do their jobs and what kind of material they have and do it in a non-confrontational way and do it before you need something, just go to become an informed citizen.
Yeah.
And then when you do need something, which inevitably you will, you'll know how to sort of push on the levers of power a little bit and get some help from, people in government are not ogres. Many of them want to do the right thing, actually, especially state and local.
Yeah.
But just going back to your question, yes, I do think the decline of local news has been a problem when that means that people really need to step up. And they also need to verify information. I mean, the sharing of stuff on social media, some of which is just completely false. You can't just share something you think might fit your criteria. You really need to try to verify information too and do a better job of that.
There is what do they call it? The internet slop and AI slop and stuff like that. It is. It's disturbing how many things I see or that people will send me, and I look at it. And I'm just like, there's no way you looked at this and thought this was real. Why did you share this?
Right. Right.
But
well, I mean, we have a president who is sharing inaccurate information constantly on social media, or still claiming after 60 courts said this was not the case, that the election in 2020 was fraudulent.
I know we're recording this on a Tuesday, but Tuesday, the 14th.
14th, Bastille Day.
Yeah. Bastille Day, you're right. But I think one of the things that is quite disturbing is the fact that this week he's planning on making some sort of formal announcement that both of the senators from the state of Georgia are that he's trying to nullify their elections. Like, they were both elected in special elections in 2021. So, that sort of seems weird because I think it was the FBI went and did a raid and pulled all of the ballots from 2020, but they're using the evidence from what they believe that they found in 2020 to try and nullify two elections in 2021. As well, Warnock was reelected in 2022.
All right.
So I constantly have to look at what it is that comes out of the White House or the administration or what's being reported by some of the mainstream news and just be like, these numbers don't add up. And how come there isn't some news director somewhere going, we can't run this? Why would we legitimize
or
this?
we have to run it and debunk it? And, I do think there is some of that. I think there's a whole kind of thing, well, if the president speaks, we have to report it mindset. And, I'm a little bit sympathetic to that, actually. I understand the mindset, but I think you have to do a lot of reporting that then will say, okay, well, yeah, he said X, Y, and Z, and not just the president, anybody else. But here's what we found. And it's, this is wrong and this information is correct. And here's why. I think one thing the mainstream media can, which I'm still a card-carrying member, I guess, can do is do a much better job of showing their work. So get people to understand why it is that we are reporting this and saying that it's false. And here's all the verification we went through. I think that would help. Media trust is way down. A lot of that mistrust has been sown again by Trump and his allies.
Yeah, I often find myself in this weird realm where I think that maybe if the reporters were just a little more aggressive, maybe if there were more Caitlin Collins out there to really push. One of the things that I find that Trump really likes to do is when he doesn't like a question, he just will talk over and belittle whoever it is that's asking the question. I don't say this because I think that my interactions with some of the geriatrics in my life, I have found that when they start talking over me, that I just talk over them, and it doesn't, there's no solution to it, but it makes me feel better. But but it does seem like sometimes, in some cases, even if it's more liberal progressive media versus the right wing media, it does seem sometimes like the president gets off the hook for some of the things that he says, especially when he holds those Oval Office sit down press conferences where we're constantly reminded of what it looks like to have poor posture or whatever. It's just constantly, it just feels like over and over we're being battered by an administration that has no desire to be honest with us. And it's is it always Trump, or is it the people that are telling Trump what to say or giving Trump the information? It's just constantly confusing. But anyway.
No, I mean, I will say he's very skilled at having figured out that if you repeat a falsehood over and over. I mean, talk about people eating cats in Ohio or, whatever. I mean, and, then J.D. Vance started talking about that and amplifying it. And suddenly it had the veneer of reality to it. And it was just like, and people were not dismissing it. And, I think that's the repetition is very effective. And unfortunately, I think sows, puts more lies into the mainstream ecosystem, if you will.
Well, there's constantly the degrading of the trust of the media, because you have two different clans of media that are constantly battling against each other to try and get the story aligned with what it is that their viewers want. But they're all selling the same catheter commercials. Like it's not like the competition is not really competition. You're getting the same reverse mortgage commercial from, Mustache Man as Fox News is getting, as MS Now is getting. Like, it's crazy to me.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this. The story that the New York Times did over the last week or so about the lack of security on the new Qatar jet has led Trump to get the FBI to investigate the reporters and to serve subpoenas on them, which I assume the Times is going to try to squash tomorrow when they get into court. But, I'm like, wait a minute, this is a national security problem that the public was certainly entitled to know and understand. I mean, why would you want the president flying back from Turkey in a non-bomb-proof plane? It seems to me the Times performed a public service, which
Agreed.
Of course, but but the response is to say we're going to investigate you. I mean, I'm like, wait a minute, maybe you should be investigating the fact that you took this jet and didn't retrofit it sufficiently.
Right. Yeah. And then, of course, and then coupled on that, Lindsey Graham passes over the weekend, and Kash Patel announces on Twitter that the FBI is at the available for a potential investigation into what? Like it's that constant barrage of information that doesn't really have any validity for anything. Like, Lindsey Graham died of based on the reporting, if it's this aortic dissection.
Yeah.
Basically, it's been described to me by a friend of mine who is a surgeon as what could likely be the most painful 15 seconds that anyone could potentially experience in their chest. And, I think here in South Carolina, we assumed that Lindsey Graham wasn't always the healthiest. We've seen him eat and whatnot. But I think that, to immediately go to this idea that there was potentially some foul play involved is just crazy to me. And some of the news decides this is interesting. Let's go after that. No, it's tabloid.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting. I mean, the medical examiner in DC is the one who said it was likely this aortic dissection. And I
Yeah.
guess they're going to do an autopsy too, which will give you a toxicology report. So, assuming he was not poisoned, which I think is what the anxiety has proven or has provoked, it should come out fairly quickly. But yeah, I mean, they're all conspiracy theorists. It
Yeah.
seems to me that's sort of a criteria for being part of the administration.
I think this week with the Mitch McConnell photo is also another one of those interesting ones. Basically, Andy Bashir asked for a proof of life, and then this photo comes out, and almost immediately I get inundated with people telling me, "Oh, this photo's AI. It doesn't even look real. Oh, it looks like this photo that they took at the pool like 3 years ago." And I get it. It's fine, but one of the things I've had to remind people is that in order to keep up with a conspiracy, you have to have as few people involved as possible, because the more people that are involved in it, then the more likely that it's going to fall apart. So the idea that his entire staff at the Capitol is potentially involved with keeping this information suppressed. The idea that now you have reporters like Scott Jennings at CNN that have said that they've had these 17-minute conversations.
I would not describe him as a reporter, by the way.
No, you're right.
He's a former McConnell staffer who's on as a political commentator on CNN.
Yeah, and sometimes I'd go as far as to say he's a consultant. It's not. I don't know what he's consulting for, but yeah, no, you're right. Absolutely. I apologize. That discredits so many other reporters. But to have the number of people involved saying that they had conversations. Thune said he had a conversation with him. Other people said they had conversations with him, and they're very similar conversations and things like that. And but until it unravels and actually, if the whole thing falls apart, then fine, I'm wrong. But if McConnell's dead, then I feel bad for the state of Kentucky.
Yeah.
Because ultimately they're the ones that get hurt by this.
Yeah, I think that's right. So,
well, speaking of secrecy and whatnot, you call it the Secrecy Industrial Complex. What does that actually look like in practice from a federal agency all the way down to like county planning boards?
Yeah, I think I will say this, that most of my reporting over many, many years has been state and local. So, the federal situation right now is so fraught because among many people who have been laid off by DOGE and by the Trump administration were, for example, all the public records officers for the Center for the CDC in Atlanta. They were all laid off. Some of them have been reinstated because, oh my God, we need somebody to respond to public records requests because there's a law, the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which requires the federal government to respond initially, at least in 20 days. So they're they're in huge violation of the law right now. Whether that amounts to anything or anybody prosecutes, we don't know. But what happens, I think, in states and localities, which is where most of the development issues occur, right? I mean, whether you've got somebody who wants to build an apartment building in a place where you think it's going to devalue your property values, or somebody wants to build a data center, or who's getting the contract to build a new school or whatever. I think what happens is that governments, first of all, they have an exemption to public disclosure when a real estate deal is going on between the government and a private entity. And that's pretty much nationwide in every public records law across the country. So real estate deals can be kept secret up to a point. And supposedly that's because, you don't want them to jack up the price because of competition or whatever. But it also keeps the public in the dark. And that's a problem, I think. But so you have that's built into the law. But then what you also have is governments that are anxious, that don't really want the public looking over their shoulder because it's kind of messy and annoying. And, that person who goes to the city council every week and yaks about, ridiculous stuff,
the
that
potential
person.
apartment building, right? Yeah.
No, I don't mean that.
No. I'm
But
saying that myself. I knew I was annoying.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
but yeah. Because
yeah. But
ultimately, it's not going to harm me.
right. But whatever. I mean, I think what happens is these governments get into a defensive crouch, and they really, it's just the public's annoying, and some people in the public can be very rude. I will say that. I always tell people, when you're going to do this kind of work, you better be absolutely perfectly polite, even when you're annoyed, even when you think they're jerking you around. You just don't lose it, because they will use that against you too.
Yeah.
But so I think, and then there is another issue, which is state legislatures generally underfund local governments. And so unless you're in an affluent part where the property taxes are high and it's getting kicked back to your community, then local government is often operating at low budgets. And by law, in every state, both the state and the local governments pretty much have to balance their budgets every year by law, which is not true of the federal government, which we know can run a huge deficit, whatever.
41 trillion.
Yes. So I think all of those things combine to it's just easier not to be open about what you're doing in government until, you've dotted the I's and crossed the T's and tied the bows, and here it is, here public, here's what we want. So the problem with that, and this is true in my book, is that things aren't perfect in government, and they are often operating at the behest of corporations. For example, in this community in Alabama, Uniontown, which I've written about in the book, they have a failing sewer system. There is a big catfish plant in the town. Okay, it's a source of jobs. So right there, you've got an issue. You don't really want to shut them down. But state records, which we were finally able to obtain, I and the community activists in the community, show that the catfish plant has routinely overused the sewer system and the water system. And so what do you do about that? Well, they might get a little slap on the wrist, but that has not stopped the federal government and the state government from going ahead and trying to build a very complicated sewer system now that the public, the poor ratepayers in the community are at risk of having to pay for, to subsidize this catfish plant, because I think the government has just decided, it's easier to fix things, not to fine them, whatever. And so this all gets sort of done behind closed doors, and the community has tried really hard for years to get information about who's spending what and who's getting the contracts and why is this polluter, if you will, getting a pass. And, somebody somewhere has made a decision that this was the better way to go. But it's your tax money, it's your rates that you're paying for electricity or water or whatever. And it's just, it's just too messy to let you intervene, I think. Some of it's deliberate. I mean, sometimes these corporations are running the show in these small communities. And, they donate to the Boys Club or the Y or whatever. They're good corporate citizens, but in the meantime, they are using our resources way more than they are paying for.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think, an anecdote to that is even in high school, our sports programs were heavily being compensated by different law firms around town, which isn't a big deal. But one of the ones that was a corporate scholar or a corporate sponsor for our high school was Georgia Pacific, who has been accused of everything from the depletion of lumber, that they would go in lumber areas earlier than they should have been or should have been allowed to, and then they go, but we're also giving this high school all of their baseball equipment,
right? Right, and we have our names on their right. Uniforms.
Yeah. Who put in that scoreboard? So I get it. It sometimes it's difficult to want to keep up a fight against some organizations that just feel sometimes too big to continue to try and argue against whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. I mean, data centers, obviously, it doesn't. data centers, prisons. I mean,
Yeah,
there's so
yeah.
many different things.
There's a prison in Uniontown too that's overusing the system.
Yeah. And that's going to happen because you have so many people confined to one space. It just doesn't, a lot of the sewer systems in this country were built 40, 50, sometimes even 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's not, we just, what we need is a different way of getting rid of our shit. That's what we need.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Any examples of NDAs that being used to keep something from the public that would genuinely surprise someone?
Well, I think, we talked about NDAs that community officials are signing with data centers, and that is going on all over the country. And that's a problem because for the various reasons we've discussed, which is, it's conceivable if you bring the public in, if you are in the government and you bring the public in, yes, there are going to be some people who are a pain in the neck, no question about it. But there are also going to be people, as there are in Uniontown, the high school shop teacher was spearheading the effort to challenge what the solution was for the sewer system and found out about different kinds of systems that might be more cost effective and might also be more effective, and was rebuffed. So I think that pretty much non-disclosure agreements should be absolutely not used, state and local government. And then, there's some effort around the country to try to get them banned, although I think you may end up with some kind of First Amendment free speech challenge if you try to ban them. Who's saying you can't do this? But, I think they are being used in all kinds of situations. I mean, the cable companies routinely got early notice of public records requests and also often non-disclosure agreements when they signed a contract to get what was then cable, now FiOS, to be installed in your community. You've got to get a permit usually from the local government, but they don't want you to know when they're going to dig up your street or whatever inconvenience they might have because they think they're a public good, and to some degree they are. And I think that this is the kind of discussion that if you could have in a non-confrontational setting when it isn't a crisis, there could be some effort to get input from the public who do know some things and might have some good ideas to offer. But, again, there's sort of this defensive crouch, push people away. We don't have time to deal with this kind of thing. So.
Is there anyone in all of your experience that you felt like, as far as a community or community leaders, that we're doing it the right way?
In my experience, not so much. And it's interesting because I've had that question before, and I probably should think about it a little more deeply. But for the kind of reporting that I have done, it has been mostly to expose some kind of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
And I think you ask a very good question. I know that there are some communities in the country, Austin, Texas, supposedly is one of them, where they have done a better job, for example, about responding to the public when the public wants information, which, under law, you're supposed to be able to get. But, I think there's a whole culture shift that needs to occur in our state and local governments. And I think they do need to try to open themselves up to public input. And the public needs to be, as I said, very collegial and collaborative. But, why not convene meetings in your community periodically to just sort of brainstorm good ideas? What do we need in this community? How do we get cleaner water? What do we do about sewer problems? Is there a way that we can work this out? Can we look at some of the research on getting forever chemicals out of the public drinking water, which was the case in Hoosick Falls? I just think the whole notion of trying to be more collaborative is something that governments could work on and communities could suggest, but I don't see it happening too often. I'm sure there are good examples out there, and if people are hearing this podcast and want to get in touch with me and tell me how great it's going in their community, I would like to hear about it. But have I found them? No.
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the things that if you can't think of one offhand, then the likelihood is that there's a good possibility that for the most part they've all kind of given us the ick.
Yeah.
Uh, and one of the things I think that you iterate is that losing local news isn't just a business story. It's not just losing a newspaper that was getting advertising from the restaurants in town, the sports, or whatever. That's the sort of impact that if there isn't reporting on what's going on locally, or keeping power in check, then you really can't have an informed public about what's going on.
Right.
But it's also the responsibility of the public to continue to buy those papers and to have those subscriptions and things like that. I think I look at, like, I used to get the newspaper every single day when I moved here to Columbia, and then they went digital, and I was like, oh, well, I can just, I'm looking at the articles and I see the advertisements on the webpage. Therefore, I'm doing my part by glancing past these advertisements on an online newspaper. But that has had now the effect is that everything's behind a paywall.
Yeah.
So I have to have a digital subscription.
Right.
My preference would be to hold something in my hands.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm very old school. I still get the New York Times in print every single day, and it costs a fortune. But let me say this about local news, which is, most people, depending on where you live in this country, are willing to go into a coffee shop and spend $5 on a coffee drink.
Sure.
Right? More than once a week, often. So could you please come up with $30 a month to, if it's the local media that's for profit, or the lot of the small startups that are around the country that are trying to do legitimate news gathering, could you make a donation to them of $30 a month, or to your public radio station if you believe in that, whatever. Yeah. I think you can. I think people need to look at how they're spending their money. I mean, good journalism takes money, and we all really want to be accurately informed, and I think you have to pay for it, but it's a huge problem.
What do you think about content creators that are potentially doing some of this local reporting about things?
I think, you have to look at them, and they have to show their work too, just what I'm saying about mainstream media. I think if you are considering yourself a reporter, even if you have no experience and no training, but you've shown up somewhere, then you need to tell us why you believe this information is true, and what your sourcing is, and what documents you've looked at. And, did you show up at the city council meeting? Is there a recording? I have anxiety about content creators.
I can see that.
And I think that, interestingly enough, the Washington Post is now doing a whole thing over here with content creators. And I'm like, whoa, is this going to absolutely kill the brand? It may. But when I did research for my book, I found a lot of people on Facebook. I didn't take what they were saying at face value. I got in touch with them. I interviewed them. Whatever. But, it was a source of potential sources, for example. And I guess that's what I would look at a content creator. I don't know that I could take their word for it, but I'd be interested in talking to them. Yeah. Interestingly enough, there's an organization based in Chicago called Documenters. It's worth looking at because they're spreading around the country. They are training civilians. That's what I would call them. They're not lawyers. They're not journalists, but they are, they're interested people who want to find out what's going on in their community. And they're doing some training for them about, go to a meeting. Here's what you need to look for. Here's how you report on it. So, I would, if you're going to be a content creator, get out there and get some credentials and some training, please.
Yeah, I had to go to school to become a broadcast media journalist. So that was...
it's a profession. It's a profession. It's not a, gee, I can show up and do this.
No, I think, and then I look at the people like Don Lemon, who had worked for CNN for so long and then no longer with CNN. And I legitimately have faith that what he is telling me, that isn't just his opinion, is probably accurate. He has built, at least in my opinion, an atmosphere of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moves on to becoming a content creator. So he sort of went that direction.
Well, he had some credentials to begin with, I think, is what, I mean, I'm not at the Washington Post anymore, but everywhere I go, they say, oh, you worked at the Washington Post when it was a real newspaper. And I'm like, yes.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but the book is available on Amazon everywhere.
Oh, yeah. But go to bookshop.org or you can.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which I don't know if people know about it, but it supports independent bookstores and you can do it online just like you do Amazon. I mean, I'm not saying don't go to Amazon. I'd love for you to buy my book. It's called Backroom Deals in Our Backyards. It's published by the New Press. You can also order it directly from the publisher. They have it online. And so, there's that way too. But, whatever you do, buy the book. I think it's useful to people. And I love to hear from readers and people with ideas about more examples of state and local secrecy and how to crack the obstruction code.
Yeah. And your website is mirandaspivack.com.
Yep.
So they can absolutely check that out. Check the show notes. They'll
and I have a
there.
Substack now too.
Oh, fantastic.
Backroomdeals.substack.com. And I'm writing once a week about some egregious secrecy issue.
No, that's fantastic. I'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
you can
thanks.
Come in as a subscriber.
Yeah.
So what's the plans? Are we already looking to what the next book is going to be?
God. Writing a book is not easy, even for a journalist. And there is some discussion now going on between my publisher and me. They actually had an idea for me. I don't really want to talk about it yet, but it does have to do with corruption and more secrecy. So I am looking for more examples and, very open to hearing from people all around the country. And, we'll see. I mean, after I wrote this book, I was like, I'm not writing another book.
That is what they all say.
Yeah. But we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, the New Press is a great publisher. They're a nonprofit publisher. They were formed many years ago by some big-time publishers who were in the big publishing industry and, had to publish books that made a lot of money. And they said, we need a place for books that may not make money, but a lot of money, but that they are very important for discussion about politics, democracy, and building a better world.
Well, I absolutely commend you on the career that you have had and the fact that you're still fighting what is essentially the good fight. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's really nice.
It's when at some point when you decide that retirement is what you want to do, I'm not saying soon because obviously you're only approaching 40, but I think that having books like this and having the reporting that you've done over your career has been essential to my readings of it. It's not just you, but so many reporters in that same intent that have driven me to be more involved in what goes on locally. So it's important, and I think that if 10 out of 100 people read it and say, this is the path I need to go on, this is how I need to be a part of the progress and be a part of making sure that the system is working for everyone equally, then it's had a positive effect. So yeah. I think it's fantastic, and I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to have this forum to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Okay.
Just want to remind everybody that the name of the book, the full name of the book is Backroom Deals in Our Government. Backroom Deals in Our Backyards. How government secrecy harms our communities and the local, how the local heroes fighting back. So again, available from New Press. It was printed in 2025, right?
Yeah, it's a year old now, but it still seems to have shelf life, and especially with the midterm elections coming up, people are saying, "What can I do?"
Well, it's really, really good work, and I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it. So,
Well, thanks.
Miranda, thank you. All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we're going to wrap it up. That's going to do it for episode number 315. Links to all of our past episodes.
Wow.
You said, wow. I've been doing this since 2017. And I'll just say, one of the reasons I started doing a podcast was because I worked in an office with a bunch of people that would give their opinions on things that I couldn't give my opinion because it was different. So when Trump took office, I was told, well, why don't you just do a podcast? Because then you can scream into the netherworld and not have to deal with hearing somebody's opinion. And then you start getting the death threats. So links to all of our past episodes, podcast platforms, merchandise, and social media available on our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com. And if you think our financial model of giving away free content and entertainment is silly, and you're in the giving mood, why not become an official Nothinger and support the show? Members get early access to this episode as well as exclusive content. Visit members.theallaboutnothing.com, or you can find a link on our webpage. You can also give a one-time donation through the same link. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can call and leave us a message, 803-672-0533. You can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can join our Discord server, links found on our webpage. Thank you for listening, everyone. You all stay safe, be kind, and keep your hands to yourself.
The All About Nothing podcast is a product of Big Media and produced and engineered by me, Barrett Gruber. Thanks to Cake for our intro music, Sick of You. You can follow Everything Cake the band at cakemusic.com. Thanks to Muff the producer for our outro music. You can follow Muff on Instagram at Muff the producer. You can follow me across social media by visiting Linktree/Barrett Gruber, and you can follow Zach King on Linktree/AAN Zach. Want to support the show? Visit our webpage, theallaboutnothing.com, and become a member. There are several tiers available that give you early access to episodes as well as exclusive content. To find links to our social media, podcast platforms, and merchandise to support the show, as well as past episodes, visit theallaboutnothing.com. If you'd like to be a part of the show, you can email the show at theallaboutnothing.com, or you can call our number and leave a message. Dial 803-672-0533. If the time between these episodes is more than you can handle, check out our sister shows. What the Pod Was That with Carrie, Zach, and myself. Welcome to Wonderland with Ami. Politically Speaking with Erica, Kirsten, and Emily. And Black, White, and Blue in the South with Dr. Jameel Brooks and Bill Kimmler. Please subscribe and share this show. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and punch that notification bell. Thank you for listening, and hear us next week.
Well, you've made it to the end. You survived the rambling, the tangents, and whatever nonsense we just subjected your ears to. Congratulations. Now that your brain is sufficiently scrambled, how about doing something productive for democracy? Before you go off to forget everything you just heard, do yourself a favor and double-check that your voter registration is actually legit at theallaboutnothing.com/voter. It's about the only way to make sure your vote counts, even if your taste in podcasts is questionable.
The preceding podcast is solely owned by the host or hosts and is distributed by Big Media, LLC. Copyright 2026.